Howdy, healthcare people. Welcome to the first installment of a new experiment. This summer, I recruited 2 analysts in training, and the goal is to take those analysts in training from no knowledge of the healthcare industry to the point where they can be useful contributors. To document the journey, we're publishing 20 videos in 10 weeks. What you're going to see next is a team meeting where I shared my perspective on standard work. This video is best enjoyed with a stylish notepad and a tasty beverage. I recommend a sip right now. Enjoy the video, and please leave us a comment if there's something you'd like us to address next time. Thanks. The title of this talk is Standard Work, the lean tool most in need of a marketing refresh. Now, if you've never heard of standard work before, I would completely and totally forgive you if you said it sounds like the worst thing ever, because who wants to be standard? Standard like a military haircut, like catering to the lowest common denominator? Nobody wants that. And work. Okay, we're at work right now, but if you had $100 million in the bank, would you be doing what you're doing right now? All right, I probably wouldn't either.
Probably not.
Probably not. Okay, so why would anybody want standard work? Standard work sounds like the thing that sucks your soul dry and leaves you less creative than before. It's actually not true. What I'm going to show in this presentation is that standard work actually improves creative problem solving by standardizing the stuff that nobody should have to think about. Now, if you have heard of standard work, then I would imagine that you're asking, really? Adam, aren't you like a data guy? Do you really document your processes with standard work? And I will tell you, yes, I really do document processes with standard work. I do it for my own work, and I do it with my clients. And to that, you might ask, really? But doesn't documenting your processes just mean you spend a bunch of hours creating documents that then you're never going to look at again, and they're just going to be a waste of time that collect digital dust while you never look at them again? To which I say, no, actually, they work fine, and I use them frequently. But I appreciate your concern, and I have seen the opposite happen with poor processes around standard work. And last, you might be wondering, no, but really? There's only so many hours in the day, Adam. Can you really justify spending that much time with process documentation? How do you possibly have time for this? And to that, I am actually going to show an example of standard work documentation paying off in terms of saved time in a healthcare data context that will be very familiar, especially to the people who are watching or listening who work for a PO. Okay. So like any presentation about a lean concept, we're going to have to start by talking about a factory. Not that kind of factory, though. I want to talk about the Cheesecake Factory. Now, Siamala, have you ever been to the Cheesecake Factory?
I have, yeah.
You have. Now, can you give me an idea of what's your cheesecake diner profile? Are you you've been there just for a couple of times, like for your cousin's birthday party, or is it more like you have a frequent diner's card and you're there every week?
Oh, no, definitely once every few years type thing. Their cheesecake is really good, but yeah, it's very rare.
The cheesecake is really good. So the impressive thing about the Cheesecake Factory is that when you sit down, you're going to be presented with a menu that is very long. Really usually 300 plus items on the dinner menu. Yeah. And this is going to be stuff from ahi tuna to beet quinoa salad to lasagna, all the way down to stuff like buffalo wings and burgers. And of course, the iconic cheesecake, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
And the impressive thing there is that no matter what you order of those 300 plus items, it's going to come out tasting pretty good, made from scratch, and it's going to look a lot like the photo that you saw in the menu. Now, that's impressive at any restaurant. And most restaurants have, let's say, 12 to 30 items. It's impressive to do at one restaurant to just make good, made from scratch food. And then if you're a restaurateur, try opening a second restaurant and maintaining the same level of quality. Try opening a third restaurant and maintaining the same level of quality. Now imagine that you are operating 292 restaurants staffed by 45,000 employees, making $2.5 billion in revenue. And imagine keeping that high standard of quality for a menu of 300 plus items.
It's a lot.
All right, so how do they do that? You can't do it without standardization. Now, if you go behind the scenes at the Cheesecake Factory, what you're going to see is, let's imagine you're at a cooking station. A customer orders something, that order is put into the computer system, and then that order comes up on the touch screen along with the list of ingredients and the steps to make it. And not just the steps to make it, the quality checks. Make sure if you're making the hibachi steak, it's got to be sliced in 1/4-inch slices. Make sure the grill marks are just so. So this is a standardized process that has been cooked up by a team of excellent chefs in a lab and then rolled out through layers of management. Now, if you're a cook and you send your plate to be sent to the customers, it's going to be reviewed by a manager. And if it doesn't score an 8, 9, or a 10 on a scale of 10, it's going to come back to you. You might have to just fix something, or you might have to throw it out and do it again. This is the end-to-end process that makes it so that very little leaves that kitchen that is not of a pretty high quality level. So now an 8 or higher out of 10 on any of 300 different items. All right, now let's keep in mind that these are professional chefs. It's not a home cook like me. Like, I could chop an onion. I can't work the line. But these are professional chefs. But I'll ask you, if you're thinking about professional chefs, who's going to score an 8, 9, or a 10 more often? And these are complex dishes with a lot of components. Is it the chef who is cooking all those recipes from memory? Or is it the chef who can reference a standardized process that's been vetted by dozens of professionals before it ever got to her? It's the latter.
Right.
Okay. So let's dive into the word standardization. What does it mean? Okay, well, this is a super unsatisfying definition. Making something conform to a standard. So taking that apart for just a second, I say there are two elements of standardization, and it comes down to the two definitions of standard. Standard meaning similar to each other. So conforming to a standard would mean removing unnecessary variation, so making it standardized, making it the same every time. Then there's also what is a standard? Like holding yourself to a high standard. So that would be deciding in advance what's good enough. So those are the two elements, in my opinion, of standardization, which would be removing variation and having standards for what's good. Mm-hmm. All right. So
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because at the beginning you mentioned how like standard work will still leave room for like creativity.
Yes.
But isn't this kind of contradicting that? Because removing what is called unnecessary variation, like, wouldn't that essentially be where the creative process is happening?
I would argue that the unnecessary variation would be like, hey, don't reinvent how to chop an onion. We know how to chop an onion. We've chopped an onion. We've engineered that to death. So like, you might be able to squeeze out a 1% improvement in onion chopping if you sink 100 hours into onion chop research. That's not a worthwhile improvement. But there are improvements that can be made just in necessary variation, not unnecessary variation.
Okay, so the word necessary versus unnecessary.
Yeah, unnecessary variation.
Okay.
And I'll show you a standardized work example that I think will, it's going to bludgeon you with the obviousness of how great it is. So I'll let the example speak for itself.
Awesome.
All right. But so the point I'm trying to get at here, 10 people with average intelligence following a tested standardized process will consistently outperform 10 people with high intelligence who are relying on memory and know-how. This is my assertion. And based on my Cheesecake Factory research and everything I've ever done in healthcare, I firmly believe this is the case. All right. So now let's start to transition this to a healthcare setting. The Cheesecake Factory, 300 items on the menu. How many items are on the menu at a hospital? All right. Well, looking at the hospital in my town, they have 5,000 items on their charge master. And some of those items are big, some are small. Like there is a, like a mitral valve replacement in the heart. Those are expensive, $97,000. There's also a tablet of ibuprofen, $2.
All right, I had one question. I meant to ask it sooner. Because in the previous slide you said outperform, like people who follow the standardized process outperform. Like, how does one measure like the performance? Is that like strictly based on like time, or like how do you measure like the quality of the output?
Sure.
Yeah.
So I'm saying that in general, I think they will perform faster and with higher quality, in general. And
Okay.
right. And in that generalized statement, there would be nothing to measure because I'm not saying what they're performing at. But in terms of healthcare, we would think about stuff like safety of the employee, safety of the patient, quality of care, the outcomes of care, and how much it costs to deliver the care, and how fast it gets delivered. So we would be considering all of those in terms of healthcare. Okay. All right. So what is standardized work really? If you're a healthcare person and you're seeing my screen, you are seeing a value stream map. This would be an emergency department value stream. So a patient checks into the emergency room, gets triaged, gets seen by a doctor, gets all their necessary diagnostics, gets admitted to the hospital if necessary, gets discharged with treatment if necessary. This is a value stream map. If we zoom in on a value stream map, you're going to see a bunch of sticky notes. And every single sticky note, like for example, RN1 triage, that is generally a piece of standard work. So that is, there will be a standardized process for collecting the patient's insurance information, a standardized process of what questions are asked in the first RN triage. And so these would be examples of standardized work in healthcare. But the common elements of standardized work, no matter what industry or context we're talking about, standardized work is a list of steps showing the best way we currently know how to do something. Standard work is not created by a manager. It would have no credibility if it were created by a manager. Standard work is created and maintained by the people who do the work. And for stuff like RN1 triage, you can bet that there were some loud voices in that room deciding what is and is not in the standard work for RN1 triage. Standard work is referenced often. First of all, preferably referenced while we do the work to make sure that we're not missing a critical step. Also, a good lean manager is going to audit standard work and observe a person as they perform their process to make sure they perform their process up to standard. Because if they're not following the standard work, it could mean that the person doing the work needs some coaching. Hey, here's why that actually is in the standard work. It could also mean that the standardized work is out of date and needs to be updated because we figured out a better way to do it, but we haven't documented the better way to do it. Standardized work includes quality standards. So how do we know we're doing a good job? And standardized work is most effective when a process has more steps than you can fit in your working memory. And generally, working memory is 3 to 7 items. And most effective when a missed step can become a big problem. So let's walk through an example of standardized work. And this is something that happens all the time at POs, and specifically, one of my clients is doing this all the time. They have to compare a report with their providers against the report of who the payer, the insurance company, thinks their providers are. So they have to compare 2 lists to each other. Let's say it's a provider's name and a count of how many patients they have. That'd be a really simple report, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's say the best way we know how to do it today is we open both reports and we paste the payer report on the right and the internal report on the left. Then one by one, we cut and paste each provider's name from the payer report right next to their name on the internal report. So that is one-to-one, we're matching up, hey, here's a provider from the payer report, and here's where they go on our internal report. Control X, Control V, Control X, Control V. Now, then we could create a formula. The patient count for the payer minus the patient count for internal would be the difference. All right. And so that whole process of one by one taking each provider and matching it up with the internal report, that's about 15 minutes. And for a manager, you might say 15 minutes, not so bad. Then we'll know what the payer thinks versus what we think. But then let's add a new person to the team. We're going to call this person the Excel expert. We add the Excel expert to the team, and the Excel expert notices, hey, if we use a VLOOKUP, this will be a lot faster. So instead of one by one cutting and pasting, what if we have 100 providers? That's kind of a lot. It's going to take a long time. If we cut and paste those, well, then we're going to have that done in 5 minutes, and we'll still get the answers we're looking for. We're going to be able to figure out how many patients the payer thinks versus how many patients we think, but it's going to be faster. Hey, and that was, all right, went from 15 minutes to 5 minutes. All right, that's a 67% increase in speed. But then let's add a new person to the team, and that person is the data scientist. The data scientist says, oh, hey, that's a cool process you're doing with the VLOOKUP. But actually, this actually seems like a great job for an outer join. And the advantage of an outer join is that if there's somebody on our report who's not in the payer report, we'll see an empty line. And if there's somebody in the payer report that's not in our report, they'll still show up in the report, but with an empty line on the left. So we should use an outer join. And my script actually, from the time it takes to set it up and run it, only takes 1 minute. Now, compared back to the original 15 minutes, that's 93% faster and higher accuracy, because there's no opportunity for manual error when, if you accidentally put Dr. Smith on Dr. Sanderson, there's no opportunity for that. Okay, so it's common to make a process with standard work. It's common to make a process faster and higher quality at the same time. And the corollary to that is it's difficult to improve your speed or your quality if you don't have a clear process. And so the question of how could you possibly have time to document these processes is, if these processes are repeated often enough, then they're worth documenting because they're worth improving both for higher quality and higher speed.
Okay, so I have one question. So
yeah.
So when in this example, when you were going through the steps, so you had to add a new person every single time, right? So there was the person who was proficient in Excel, and then there's the data scientist. So there is kind of also I guess my question is you have to add other people with other areas of expertise essentially to create the most efficient and standardized work possible, right? Because at the beginning, if that was the original standardized process, that still wasn't the most efficient way unless other people were added, right?
Well, I would tend to agree with that a lot of times process breakthroughs can happen when you review your process with somebody else who has different experience or different know-how. Now, you don't have to hire them and pay them a full-time salary. They could just be, a colleague from a different department. Different departments might just know different facts or different techniques than you do. Or it could just be, a coach or a mentor who looks at your process. But if they have no process to look at, then it would be very difficult for them to help you improve. Okay.
Interesting. Again, another question that I'm not sure how to phrase properly, but how does standard work impact higher level management, I guess, is my question kind of. So like you were saying, this is a standardized work that's created by the workers, for the workers, right? But there's no is there does this also apply to upper level management and leadership and CEOs, right? Executives for certain companies and who, right?
Totally. No, it's a great question. So I would say that there are kind of two directions I could go with that. One is that one of the most important lean principles, in my opinion, is focus on process. So when you focus on process, then it's a lot more about when you're, having a conversation with somebody about how they're performing. If you can focus on the process and not on the outcome and not on the person. So, let's say we had a bad outcome. It's not because you're a bad person or you weren't trying hard. It's because we have a problem with our process. So we can depersonalize it, which brings everyone to the problem solving table and not defensive. So being able to focus on process is powerful for the relationship between a manager and a frontline worker. Also, in healthcare organizations and in a lot of organizations, they have what they call leader standard work, which would be just because you're a manager doesn't mean you don't have work to do. So your leader standard work would be stuff like hearing from your team about what's going on and making sure that the other people who are impacted by your team's activities, making sure that they know what's up. So that would be an example of leader standard work. And if you have a standardized process for how you make sure you're collecting the right information from your team and how do you make sure you're distributing the right information to your peers and the people above you in the organization, that would help you perform better as a leader.
Yeah, I like what you said about like kind of removing like the personal element of the process.
Yeah.
Well, like
right,
kind of
exactly.
Because I even like, I know like for me, like as a woman, I've kind of been like conditioned to internalize like mistakes and like internalize fault, even if it's like not my own. And this kind of like helps to mitigate like something like that as well, like kind of the like implicit bias side of that too.
Yep, absolutely. Right. You used a VLOOKUP because you're an imposter and you don't deserve to be a data scientist. like compare that to, hey, I was looking at the process we use to compare those two reports and I saw a way that we could potentially improve it. Would it be okay if we tested an improvement to the process? Like the tonality between those two, vastly different.
Right. Right. You're an imposter. Yeah. Cool. Cool. I can't think of any more questions. I guess that's it.
Awesome. Well, thanks for listening. If you got value from this, please consider subscribing. Or if you're seeing this on LinkedIn, you can follow me to get every episode in your feed. And if you work for a PO and you want to impress your boss or impress your board, if you are the boss, then consider checking out Find Your Leverage Point. It's a free email course by me teaching you how to put a dollar value on the overlapping incentives in your contracts. You can find that at analyticaliq.com. There's also probably a link down below here. Until next time, this is Adam Lorton. See ya.